We are now at the fourth operation, which calls upon planetary rulerships. The second operation covered the astrological houses, the third addressed the zodiac signs, and now through the 36 decans, we examine planetary influences. But what you need to know is the main mode of interpretation for the fourth operation will be elemental dignities. The discrepancy among primary texts on the fourth operation might best be characterized as an astrological approach versus a Kabbalistic approach. I'll address both in this video lecture, but the approach we'll be focusing on in this course will be the astrological approach. In short, the astrological approach is a series of 3-card readings for elemental dominance or weakness using a total of 36 cards that represent the 36 decans in astrology. Decans represent the synthesis or reconciliation of space-time. A study guide that gives you the basics on decan analysis is provided in your course materials. Now please preview pages 39 through 46 before proceeding. For the Kabbalistic approach, start by collecting all the cards, shuffle the deck, and then turn over the entire deck face up and go in search of your significator card. Once the significator card is located, shift perspectives so the significator is on top as we had done before, and now pull out the first 36 cards of the deck behind that significator. Your workbook explains the different approaches between including the significator as count 1 or not, and observing the next card over as count 1. In the example shown, the significator is being counted as count 1. Then move around the circle per card counting principles like before and count to mark the cards. At the end, you'll pull out the marked cards, read it as a string narrative, and then pair off the cards to read the pairs. That's the Kabbalistic approach. As you can see, the Kabbalistic approach is rooted in card counting, which itself has Kabbalistic undertones. Then reading the selected cards as a narrative, card pairing, all much like the earlier operations. This video will focus on the astrological approach. After shuffling the deck, turning it face up in search of the significator, shifting perspective so the significator is on top, next, lay out the cards as before into a circle of 36 cards. Here in the example, this time the next card over is counted as count 1. You should now have a very, very large circle of 36 cards. You can follow the zodiac wheel positions, but personally here it's so much easier to just start at the top and go clockwise. Either or, that's not really important. What's important is the intent that these 36 cards represent the 36 decan rulers. Now we are going to read every triplet of cards for elemental dignities. Examine cards 1, 2, and 3 first and read those 3 collectively to determine elemental dominance or weakness. And you can even read these cards as a 3-card reading related to the corresponding zodiac sign. Then move on to cards 4, 5, and 6 and again, assess for elemental dominance or weakness. Continue around this large circle, stopping at every set of 3 cards for analysis. Practice the fourth operation using the guided table on page 44. After you've assembled your first 36 cards, write the card names in order of the 36 decans into that table on page 44. Then on page 45, assess each triplet of cards you wrote on page 44 for the dominating element. Write out the dominating element in each triplet in the guided table on page 45, and now decide whether, per elemental dignities, that triplet of cards is notable. Again, follow the instruction here on pages 44 and 45. Let's work through a few examples. The first triplet in our circle is Page of Cups, King of Pentacles, 8 of Pentacles. Water, Earth, and Earth. Earth dominates. This is for the first house under sign Aries, which is fire, as noted on page 45. That means Earth is dominating in a fire house. Neutral, not notable. Here's another example. The Hanged Man, 6 of Wands, and 2 of Swords. The Hanged Man is water. Wands is fire. Swords is air. Water, fire, air. No elemental dominance or weakness comes through. By virtue of that alone, this is not notable per elemental dignities analysis, but in a 3-card reading, you would want to make note of the major arcanum, the Hanged Man. Let's assume this triplet of cards is for house 3 under Gemini. That's an air house and sign. Here we have water, fire, and even though water weakens, ultimately here, fire prevails. This is fire dominant. Fire dominates in an air house. Fire and air empower. This house is strengthened. It is notable as strengthening. Final example. 4 of Cups, 8 of Wands, Death card. Water, fire, water. Water dominates. Let's assume this was house 4, Cancer. That's a water house and sign. Water dominating in a water house and sign, well, this is notable. But what if this was house 5, Leo? That would be a fire house and sign. Water dominating in a fire house and sign has a weakening effect, but that's still notable. So mark as notable and indicate that it weakens. You may need to watch these examples a couple of more times and rewind the video for a review if you didn't quite follow that. The 3-minute OOTK run-through demonstrated the fourth operation this way by setting out each triplet of deacons in rows and organizing the 36 deacon cards as so into rows and columns, mainly because in terms of layout and practicality, this is an easier setup if you're actually implementing the fourth operation into practice. The monstrosity that is the circle of 36 cards isn't very practicable, so this is an alternative to that. Everything remains the same in terms of analysis, only instead of a huge cumbersome circle, now you have easy to read rows and columns. Let me share with you my practical implementation of the fourth operation, how I can stay on track of house and sign versus elemental dominance during an actual client reading. I use 4 gemstones that represent the order fire, earth, air, and water for me. Then I hold the 36 cards in my hand. I pull down 1 gemstone, set out 3 cards, and I read it. Then I return the gemstone, pull down the next gemstone, next 3 cards, and read. In that succession, you can read 36 cards for the 36 deacons using the 12 signs and their elemental dignities and stay organized. As soon as you pull down one of the gemstones, you know exactly which house and sign you're using, whether it's fire, earth, air, or water, basically by the color of the gemstone. The rocks look good on the reading table, and at any point I know exactly which elemental house and sign I need to assess the 3 cards through, and I read each set of 3 cards for notability to the client. When it is notable, like it strengthens or weakens, I do a mini 3-card reading. If it is not notable, I don't say anything to the client and I move on. I'll explain to the client, if they're curious, that what I'm doing here specifically is spotting for practical advice on the matter at hand, and when all elements are neutral in the cards, there's no call for action. But of course, if a client presses, I'll still perform a 3-card reading on the non-notable triplets anyway. Page 46 of your workbook further explains how to examine the triplets of cards through both the framework of elemental dignities, which is the primary mode in interpreting deacons, and through the 12 houses and their correspondences to specific areas of life. And that concludes the fourth operation.